Hello, my name is Ebony Love, and today is August 18th, 2023. I am physically located in Jacksonville, Florida, and I am joined by attorney Adriante Carter, who is located in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me today, Adriante.
Of course, of course. Glad to be here.
And so this recording is taking place over Zoom, and we are audio recording only. My first question is, I like to ground us and before we get started. And so what is your earliest memory?
Ooh. My earliest memory is probably my villain origin story. And it is in fourth grade. Uh, we had an award. This is before Ben Carson went bad, but I'm originally from Baltimore, and little Ben Carson history. He worked at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, and he started a scholarship for college tuition for elementary school students. So in fourth grade, the award came down, and my teacher went through this whole thing, brought me and my best friend at the time up to the front of the class because the award came down between the two of us. And I now said it was going to my best friend at the time. And that's the first time I felt so dramatic because it was in fourth grade. But it's the first time I felt failure. And I vowed to never feel that again on some Batman situation. I vowed to never feel that again. So my earliest memory is probably in fourth grade villain origin story. Losing out on a Ben Carson scholarship, which I mean now I'm glad my name isn't attached to.
A blessing in disguise.
That is my probably my earliest memory.
And what was it like growing up in Baltimore?
So people actually laugh at me because I'm from Baltimore naturally. Went to Baltimore City public schools, but like kind of sheltered, like kind of uh, county adjacent. And in Baltimore, you're in the city or you're in the county. And by the county, they literally anything outside of Baltimore city limits is the county. And like there are certain stigmas associated with each. And people like growing up attaching what I have to deal with now when I tell people I'm from Baltimore, it's have you ever watched The Wire? It's like, no. Like, no, I have never had to watch The Wire. But growing up in Baltimore, I think it was interesting for me because I come from a line of family members who will like always go to the same schools, same elementary schools, same middle schools, same high schools, and stuff like that. And I'm the youngest in my family of five, of four siblings, and I was the one who started going to different schools and magnet schools and gifted programs and stuff like that. So I was kind of sheltered from the general sense of what it means when people say they're from Baltimore. Like, I didn't live in the middle of the city, I didn't go to inner city schools. And some people discount me being from Baltimore because of that. But I think for me it was fine. I mean, I found some great people. I'm still friends with people I met in elementary school, people I met in middle school. I still talk to my middle school teachers. They swipe up on my Instagram stories. Like, so it's like I've always been a person who likes to cultivate and build and maintain relationships. So growing up in Baltimore, it was just a bunch of meeting lifelong people who are still in my life to this day. And being in gifted and talented programs, not really even knowing what that meant. Someone just looked at me one day and said, "You're smart," and started giving opportunities that other people weren't privy to, which is a burden on the gifted and talented marker or whatever. But it got me to where I am today. So I guess that was an assist to me. But overall, I think it was a good experience. It's very foundational in who I am today. And it really put my roots there and gives me the opportunity to tell a story that starts in Baltimore and looks different than a lot of other stories that come out of Baltimore.
And why did your parents decide to send you to these magnet schools instead of all of your siblings?
Mostly because I was fervent about it. Like I wouldn't let it go. Like I learned at a very early age that I wanted to do something different. Um, like because I'm the youngest, and people have the stereotypes of what it means to be the youngest child, spoiled, XYZ. But what it really is I got to see 4 people make mistakes before I even had an opportunity to try the thing. I got to see 4 people try and succeed or try and fail. So then I got to make a decision about the path that I wanted to choose and where I wanted to go. And I think my parents, in addition to me being so enthusiastic about it, they listened to my teachers because I mean, there's a lot of studies and agents of socialization and stuff like that. And teachers are one, school is one, and parents are another. And your teacher encounters you in a way that your parents never will. So they listened to my teachers when they told them that I was gifted, when I was smart. And I remember like in 5th grade, my teacher, her name was Miss Burton, going to my parents at a teacher conference or a back to school night and telling them if there's a problem, if there's a math problem that needs to be solved and no one else can do it, we call on Adriante. And my mom still tells that story to this day. But I think I was so enthusiastic about being in a different situation and trying different things and exploring in ways that my siblings weren't, which even is true to this day. I'm the only one who has moved out of Maryland and stayed out of Maryland. But just the idea that I wanted to try different things and do different things, and my parents actually listening to me and actually listened to my teachers when they described the student that I was and the capabilities that I had.
And so I know I grew up in the South, and I also was placed in. So I was placed in gifted programs, and I'm laughing because when I lived in Georgia, I was immediately placed in gifted programs, and then I moved to Florida, and they were like, "You're not smart enough." And then they changed their mind after I was sitting in a corner, and the teacher was like, "Why are you not doing anything?" And I was like, "Because I already finished all the assignments for the entire week." And that's what they're like, "You need to get out of this
You
class."
get out of this class. Go to a different one. Go to a different one.
And so my question is, what was the racial makeup of your classmates? Were you usually the only Black person, or what did that look like?
Funny enough, all I knew was Black people. Like until law school, really. Because Baltimore inner city, and maybe my senior year of high school when I transferred out of Baltimore City schools and moved further out into the suburbs and went to a county school in Harford County, Maryland for my senior year. But I went to an HBC for undergrad, and then I went to a PWI for law school. So I had never seen a massive collection of white people really until law school. Like in Baltimore, like they're there, right? And depending on the schools I went to, and because the schools I went to were not really deep in the inner city, or they were gifted and talented, the racial makeup was more diverse. Like there were more Asian people, more white people, than a school that my siblings went to. But it was still mostly Black. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know there was a massive collection of white people in any location all gathered at once. Pretty honestly, my first SEC game day, and I'm driving around Gainesville, and I'm like, "What is this? What is going on?" There's RVs, and there's just massive units of white people. I'm like, this is crazy. But then it quickly turned into, oh, this is going to be your profession. So I had to, adapt and get used to it. And I have had other, experiences of collections like that. But as far as school goes and the racial makeup of the programs I was in, um, it was essentially taking a bunch of smart Black people and putting them in a room together.
Mhm.
And there, like I said, there were other sprinkles there, but they were certainly few and far between than I've seen in other settings. And I understand that that is a benefit, I guess, of being from Maryland. Of course, is a border state, right? Some people say South, some people say North. It's obviously in the middle. It's called Mid-Atlantic. It's in the middle there. But being in Baltimore, being in the inner city of one of those states, I just think I was given more of an opportunity to get more exposure to people of color in that way. So the racial makeup, I guess, was a bit more diverse than someone may experience in a Southern school. Obviously, there's historical implications of that, but I definitely think it was I got to see a lot of smart Black people together and know that that was my standard. Um, uh, so it was definitely more diverse than I guess other people would have to experience in their programs in other states.
Were you a first generation college student?
College student, law student, college grad, all the things. First to come through all the ways.
And so how did you navigate graduating from high school and trying to figure out what university you wanted to go through for undergrad?
I didn't really navigate it. I had my first experience with college was my I think social studies teacher or something, maybe American government in high school, taking us down to the library and having us log into the system and pick our dream colleges. And I was lofty. Stanford, LSU, Penn. I didn't even know what that meant. I'm like, these sound cool. And I was into college football at the time. So I'm like, I've seen these school play football. Like obviously, if they're on TV, something good's happening there. But I didn't really know. There's like so many gaps in knowledge that you have as a first gen, right? You don't know what, but for me at least, I don't know really what college was, what it entailed, what it meant to go away to college, like what I was expecting when I walked on the campus, like being away from home. Like there were so many unknowns, and then also so many unknowns that you don't even realize you're going to encounter. So I was so ignorant to the process that I actually applied. I went to Delaware State University in Dover and HBCU. I applied there twice because I didn't even know that I had already been accepted, and they had like an on-site admission day as a part of a tour, and I applied again, and they're like, "Ma'am, you've already been accepted." I'm like, "Oh yeah, you're right." So I had to really go through that journey, just kind of like if someone had gone into a room and cut all the lights off and just dropped me in and said, figure out how to get out of this room. That was the college admission process. I didn't know FAFSA. I didn't know how to do FAFSA. I didn't know how to apply to financial aid. I didn't know anything about scholarships. Like I was kind of just feeling around in the dark, and I actually ended up paying a lot more than I should have for undergrad because of that. So it was definitely a whole black box of situation that I'd had no idea about, that I kind of just had to feel and figure out for myself. And I have 11 nieces and nephews, the oldest of which just graduated high school. The second one is a junior, and we're going through the process for her. But now that's me, right? Like that's what I call it is the minority tax. But that is the burden that then gets placed on a first gen. It's like, well, now go teach. So I didn't know how to navigate the college admission process, but because I ended up doing it and because I ended up getting out of it, now I carry that burden to help people in my family who otherwise would not be able to do that. because they don't have anybody else to tell them how it's done.
And how did you choose Delaware State?
It was far enough away from home to be away, but close enough to still be close. It was about an hour and 15 minutes away from my house in Maryland. It was a smaller school. I didn't really want the big school energy. It was an HBCU, and I wanted to continue to be surrounded by my people. And honestly, my high school GPA was so terrible that it's the school I got into.
Mhm.
Which I tell people now, and it's crazy to think about because I was very successful in both undergrad and law school. I had a terrible high school GPA. I'm talking like 2.3, something like that, something crazy, like some crazy low. And actually, it was like 1 point something before I transferred to my senior year high school, because that school was easy. I was taking like piano stuff. So I got like a bunch of A's and raised my GPA up a little bit, but my GPA was so bad that it was school I got into, school that accepted me. And it just kind of worked out. Like, honestly, how I describe it, I kind of lucked into Delaware State. I kind of lucked into the people I met and the program I was in and the professors I had. Because I was kind of feeling around in the dark. I didn't know much. I knew that there was a university close enough to home that had political science. Fine. And I went there. But it really wasn't any type of, because a lot of I talk to people now, attorneys who are like dealing with it with their kids who are graduating high school, like, oh, we are going on tours and we're doing this and we're checking out this school. And he applied here, but he's really hoping to get in there. And it's like, I didn't have any of that. I didn't have any of that experience. I wasn't at home waiting for a bunch of acceptance letters to come in because I didn't apply to a bunch of places. I looked at Delaware State. Honestly, I looked at Liberty, and I saw it was in Lynchburg, Virginia. First, no, and then on the essay, it asked me to explain how Jesus was a part of my life, and I'm like, what does this have to do with my political science degree? And then I think I looked at like LaSalle in Pennsylvania, but like nothing. I did not do a vast application or application session where I applied to a bunch of places, looked at a bunch of places, and decided on Delaware State. I kind of just looked into it.
What would you tell a student who might be in a situation similar to yours where, you weren't the strongest student coming out of high school, but, like transitioning into college, obviously you did very well. Like, what would you tell that student either through the transition or trying to establish themselves in college to do well?
Honestly, find your thing. Because I found that high school was extremely, extremely mundane. And that's why I didn't do well. I was doing things I wasn't interested in. I wasn't having a good time. I didn't really have many friends. But what I found helped me when I got to college. I started majoring in political science. I got introduced to philosophy. I started being around smart people who were smarter than me, which is what I really needed to push me to be a better student and a better person. Find your thing. I found what I enjoyed, because what will come out of you enjoying it is an actual dedication and commitment to do well. Because you don't do well in things you don't enjoy, that don't bring you joy, that don't bring you happiness. So find your thing and really focus on that. And also be completely okay with going on a self-actualization mission once you get to college. Because you're gonna have to find the thing. It's not just gonna come to you, it's not just gonna fall in your lap. It may take some trial and error to find your thing, but stay the course. Always realize that you will come out the other side of that better because of it. And really commit yourself to learning yourself, because I didn't peak in high school, and I'm very glad I didn't. I was probably at my lowest in high school. Uh, and at the time, it felt like that was it. That was my life story. That's what was gonna happen. But because I put the time, energy, and effort into finding what brought me joy, finding my thing, I was then able to adapt in life in a way that I otherwise would not have been able to had I just stayed the path that I was already on. So I definitely think finding what you enjoy and really committing to that is how you bring yourself out of that dump that you found yourself in if your high school GPA wasn't that great.
Okay, transitioning just a little bit, can you tell me about your legislative fellow experience?
So yeah, I mean, that was in undergrad, and because again, I had no idea really what the path I was charting was on, I ended up talking to other students in undergrad and finding out what they did. Like if we had similar goals, we were trying to talking to people who also wanted to go to law school, who were also interested in being a lawyer or being involved in politics, either way. To finding charting my path outside of undergrad began with talking to other people in undergrad who were ahead of me, who were already charting their path. So there was a student, her name's Gabby Davis. She had been a legislative fellow. And she told me about the program. She said I should really be interested in being involved in it, because what they do is it's an entire Delaware situation. So as everyone tends to know when I talk about Delaware, is the University of Delaware. And this program takes the majority of their students from the University of Delaware. And then they take one or two students from the two smaller universities in Delaware. Well, now they're one because Delaware State purchased the other smaller university in Delaware. But they usually take one or two students from the other universities. And she's like, you're a Black woman. They're not going to find one of those at University of Delaware, but they need that for their program. So you have an easy path in. The path has been charted for you pretty much by her, which is a testament to, what one Black person does, all the other Black people will come through after them and do, because we're a monolith, obviously. But
And
so
that
she
was
started.
that was sarcasm.
Absolutely. Oh, I guess that doesn't come across in text. Sarcasm.
Yeah.
Sarcasm. But so she charted that path for me. She told me about the program, and I went ahead and applied, and I got it. But it's a great opportunity to be involved in the General Assembly in a state, and specifically in Delaware, which is a smaller state. So even as a legislative fellow, I was heavily involved in the legislative process. I was involved with staffing the Health and Human Development Committee and a manufactured housing committee, which is I learned is mobile homes and stuff like that. But I had the opportunity to pretty much sit in on committee meetings, and I would take the notes and be involved with the state senators and representatives that were involved in the committees and stuff like that, and really sit down and talk to them and hear the type of legislative debates that you hear that get put on the record. Like if you're doing case research and you're looking for legislative history, I was typing up that legislative history for that state law. And I thought that was just a really great opportunity to be pretty much on the ground, seeing a bill go from an idea to law.
So for somebody who's listening to this, there's like popular culture debates about, there are too many lawyers in politics. And so without getting into like actual political debates, can you explain how the law and politics kind of interact?
So yeah, that was actually one of the first opportunities I had to interact with lawyers in multiple capacities in the General Assembly. So sometimes lawyers are lobbyists. Sometimes companies will pay a law firm to send a lawyer down to the General Assembly and advocate on their behalf. I've seen that. I've seen legislative attorneys, like there are people who actually write the laws and write the bills and make sure it's not unconstitutional and go through the whole shebang and the works. And those are legislative attorneys, and I had an opportunity to interact with them there. There were some senators, state senators and representatives who were attorneys, otherwise, who had a practice and also was a state representative or senator. So I think the law and politics can interact in a lot of ways, but there are lawyers who are in politics, who don't necessarily practice law, but they do legal adjacent things. And after the bill or the idea becomes a law, then there are lawyers who interpret it and handle it and help their clients navigate that law. So I think the law and politics interact in a lot of ways. I mean, I don't think there could ever be too many lawyers in politics, because simply having legal training puts you in a position to call out BS when you see it. And that is a necessary part of the legal, of the political arena. It's necessary to have people who understand the law involved in politics. Otherwise, you're going to get laws and actions, and just it would be an absolute mess if you didn't have a lawyer involved in the legislative process. I cannot tell you how many times a state senator or representative would come up with an idea and the lawyer would have to be like, no, like we can't do that because of XYZ. And it's that training and that legal knowledge that allows an attorney to stop in the tracks something that may otherwise come to fruition. And I think that's a very pivotal part of lawyers in politics. I don't think you can ever have too many of those people and those sounding boards to correct people who otherwise would do things that could infringe on people's rights, that could send someone to prison. Or in the positive sense, you want to have a lawyer that who can bring an idea from a state senator representative to life in a legal way. Like, for example, there was a bill that came through when I was a legislative fellow that allowed prisoners to, and because you can't, it was a part of the law otherwise that you could not be a prisoner and get a barber's license. So a constituent wanted to do that, or wanted to advocate on behalf of their family member so that that person could get a barber's license while they were in prison. And they came to their state senator and told them that. And then the state senator will then have to go to the attorney, like, how can we make this happen? What law do we have that we need to amend to make this a thing? And that interaction has to happen to bring good ideas to fruition and to stop bad ideas from coming to fruition. So I think the law and politics definitely overlap in a way that is very important and cannot be understated.
And for somebody who's listening to this, and you might not, like, just to like further define Adriante's answer. So you have some lawyers who lobby to get an idea or a bill actually passed. Those are lobbyists. But then you also have other attorneys who work for the legislature in different roles. And this might be at the state level, the federal level, or even at your local level. And what those attorneys do is they will look at ordinances, which are proposed laws, or they'll look at bills, which again are proposed laws, and they will say, hey, I think that these are the constitutional issues that you will have to deal with. And the attorneys do that at the beginning so that if there are court challenges later on, the legislature actually understands why those court challenges are coming, or they can be prepared to defend the legality of the final proposed law. So there are a lot of job opportunities where you don't have to be a politician. You can just be a lawyer, but you are helping the political process in some ways. And so my next question for you is, so you're a legislative fellow. How did you go from finishing that fellowship to, you know, applying for law school and going through the process of getting into law school?
So I did that fellowship, I want to say my senior year of undergrad, and I was already applying prior to the fellowship. I think I took my first LSAT and did terrible on it, by the way, my junior year of undergrad. And I took a second LSAT, did marginally better, but not much. um, uh, the next spring, I want to say I took my first one in the fall of my junior year, and the next one in the spring of my junior year, and then went on to continue to apply for law schools. But I actually found out I got into law school on a field trip for the legislative fellowship. We were going down to DC because there's a thing called the National Conference of State Legislatures, which is pretty much a database or a company that manages and maintains all of the legislative process in all of the states. So they wanted us to have an opportunity to go there and to look at those things. But that's an aside. I was on the bus on the way down, and I found this was actually the last day of Black History Month. I found out I got into 3 law schools on the same day. Michigan State, University of Florida, and UC Davis. I was all over the place, obviously, applying for law school in every region. But I took the knowledge that I learned as a legislative fellow, which pretty much was my first job, in the sense where I had to wear business casual to work and interact with people and have interpersonal relationships with coworkers and stuff like that. And people say to treat law school as a job. So I took all the experience I got during the legislative fellowship, and I went forth into law school and managed my interpersonal relationships in a similar way that I could only have learned in that setting. Otherwise, I would not have had that experience and that knowledge. And then I went on to law school at the University of Florida. And I guess the application process was a whole shebang, and just it's a mess, and they're trying to clean it up. Not great now, but like the LSAC is trying to clean up how many times you can take the LSAT and where you can take it. I think they offer it online now and stuff like that. But the application process was a whole thing. I originally was supposed to go to Ohio State. They didn't give me enough money, what the University of Florida did. So I ended up going to UF and decided on UF. But once I got there, you quickly again realize, well, I did that. I know nothing, right? Like I know nothing. I don't know where I am. I'm moving from Maryland down to Florida. I'm like 13, 14 hours away from my family in a city I don't know, with people I don't know, in an environment I'm completely unaware of, and you have to adapt. So once I got to law school, I started to adapt. You know, I knew that I could do school. I learned that in college, which goes back to the previous question about, you know, how would you come out of a dump of a bad GPA in high school, finding your thing. I knew I could do school. I knew I could get good grades. I knew I could take a test. So then I started focusing on my interpersonal relationships with my colleagues that would eventually, you know, who are also going to go forth and be lawyers, and we may encounter each other in other situations. So I then moved on to cultivating those relationships with my colleagues, because the school thing is going to take care of itself. I had a philosophy professor in undergrad who told me to never bow at the altar of grades. You know, go in, learn all you can learn, do all you can do, and the grades will follow. So I knew that I could do school. I knew I could learn. I knew I could take in the information. So my focus in law school pretty much turned to building relationships with other attorneys that I knew were going to be my friends, and that that is directly related to the legislative fellow experience that told me and taught me how to navigate those environments, those professional environments. That I could go to a happy hour hosted by a firm and know how to navigate and talk to people and talk to attorneys, that I could interact with my friends at school, with my fellow classmates, and build those relationships in a way that maintains both a personal and a professional aspect to those relationships. I think coming from the legislative fellowship into law school was just what I learned most, and what helped me definitely was building interpersonal relationships. And I have a thing that's like, no one fires the person they like. So like make sure that people like you. So that's really how I got to where I am and got through law school and got from the legislative fellowship to law school, is making sure that I build and maintain relationships with the people that I encounter.
And how would you advise someone? So like, I'm going to take you as the example. So you went to predominantly Black high school, you went to an HBCU, which we never defined. HBCU is a historically Black college and university. And then now you're going to a PWI, which is a predominantly white institution. So how did you, you kind of like painted the picture of going to your first SEC, which is Southeastern Conference for football, your first SEC football game at the University of Florida. And like the best way to describe it is organized pandemonium. People are parked everywhere, like in the grass. They'll drive up hills, they'll be in ditches, they have tents galore, alcohol everywhere, food everywhere, grills everywhere, and just like I'm not exaggerating when I say every single street has a car on it. You have people on buses, hanging out the buses, trying to get to the stadium. It's a lot. But how do you walk into that environment where you have never seen something like this? And how do you manage to make those relationships with people who you may not have had to interact with before the legislative fellow or coming to law school?
So how I describe this, and how my people around me will say the things like my mom will describe it as, you can walk into any room and be comfortable. How I say it is, I'm good in every hood. Like, it really doesn't matter where I'm at, who I'm with, who I'm surrounded by. While it may be a culture shock, the best thing that I can tell anyone in that particular situation, you're in an environment where you don't know anything, you don't know anyone, you feel out of place. Find one person that you can talk to, and you can find something you have in common with any person you encounter, and talk about that thing. Because then you leave that interaction feeling like you've connected with somebody, and that other person who you talk to feels understood and seen because you connected with them on something that you guys have in common. And that is how I navigate those massive situations. Going into something where you have no idea anybody in the room. You have nothing to call back to, no friend. You go to a party, you hang by your one friend. You don't have that in certain situations. So you find one person who you can talk to. And quickly you realize that people will start to gravitate to your group, right? Like in those happy hours or in those situations where there's a bunch of people you don't know, I promise you're not the only one who's feeling out of place. And other people will similarly feel out of place and also be looking for that group to join or that person to talk to. And quickly you realize, you look up and there's like 4 people around having a conversation about something that you didn't know anyone agreed on prior to venturing into this conversation. Be cognizant of where you are. At an SEC football game, it's very easy to find a friend and find one thing you have in common because you're both here cheering on the team, right? So that's an easy way in. If you're at a happy hour with a bunch of attorneys, listen before you speak, and see what that person's talking about, and try to catch on to something that you connect to. It can be something very similar, something very simple as like, they have a dog. You also have a dog. Talk about your dogs, right? Like, they enjoy knitting or whatever. maybe your aunt did, right? Talk about something that like you can call back to, a memory you have that makes that person you're talking to feel heard and seen and connected to, and also helps you bridge a gap that you had that previously wasn't bridged. You went in not knowing anybody, and now you know one person who you have something in common with, and you leave that interaction at least not feeling alone anymore in that environment.
And so I'm going back to your villain origin story. So you described your earliest memory being like, this was my first taste of failure and you never wanted to feel that again. Mm-hmm. Were there any obstacles that you had to face either in undergrad or in law school that you overcame, and like, how did you overcome those obstacles?
Excuse me. There are many obstacles I had to face, primarily on knowledge barrier, on knowledge gap of the environment, situation, how to handle academic environments. So that the first obstacle was always going to be, for me, I quite literally know nothing about this thing I'm doing. I know nothing about this area I'm going into. I know nothing about the people I'm about to encounter. I know nothing. But what I just described of finding one person and connecting with them is how I got through a lot of those knowledge barrier situations. Connecting with a professor, connecting with another student, forming a student group. I became a supplemental instructor, which is essentially just a tutor for some classes in undergrad. That's probably my first opportunity in undergrad I had to venture out of my immediate circle and start meeting other people and talking to other people and building my circle into a larger cachet of individuals who can see you around campus and say, hey, making friends in an environment that you've never been in before. So that knowledge barrier and knowledge gap of knowing nothing and not knowing your environment or anything, how I bridged that was obviously the meeting people situation. Another barrier I would say would be grades. Coming out of a bad high school GPA, I had something to prove to myself. Absent anybody else who needed to hear about it and know about it. I had something to prove to myself about getting to be the student that I know I could be. So I needed to be really good, really, really good. And especially coming out of you quickly, when you get to college, you can, and a natural thing that the legal field will do is to have you rank or characterize where you are in relation to other things that exist. So I knew that at Delaware State, a small school in Dover, Delaware, I was coming out of undergrad against and applying to law school against a bunch of people who were at better universities, who were getting better grades than I was, who were having better experiences and better networking opportunities than I had. So then I had to overcompensate for the lack of like the esteem associated with my university. So I could not just be a good student. I had to be a great student. I could not just have a good GPA. I had to have a great GPA. So I ended up graduating undergrad with a 4.0 GPA. And what that creates as a burden throughout the 4 years and all the classes I took is after the first semester, you get a 4.0. It's like, good job. Second semester is like, it's freshman year. That's fine. You did good. But then what that created in me was a perfectionist. So now I always have to get that. I always have to do that. I always have to get a 4.0. I always have to get straight A's, which creates a whole bout of anxiety and everything. Don't worry, I'm speaking about it with my therapist.
Can you graduate law school without having a therapist? I think the answer is no. But
yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But it creates a whole bout of perfectionists, and you gotta You have to be good. You can't just be good. You have to be the best. You have to succeed in ways that you have not succeeded in before, that other people can't touch. So then that was a burden. I have to get good grades, and I have to get to a place where I've never seen anyone in my family go before. And then that travels into law school, where it is infinitely harder to get good grades. I went from being a big fish in a small pond at Delaware State, just being a fish in a pond full of fish, and we're all great, and we're all doing good, and we're all trying to achieve the same things. And if you're at a top law school like we went to, if you're at that law school, you know every student you encounter is at least as good, if not better, than you. Which was a shock, which is another burden I had to come into, because like I could rattle off A's in undergrad like no one's business. It really wasn't a problem. Like I was political science and philosophy. I just had to talk. I can talk. I just had to talk. But in law school, you have to have skills, right? You have to adapt and develop skills, and you have to train your mind to think like a lawyer, which is difficult. So quickly it became, I'm trying to survive in this legal field that I'm entering into, but also realizing that the opportunities that you get after law school are directly tied to, for most people, your grades. And your grades get you in the door at a lot of places. The firm I work at now is a job that I got as a 1L and my 1L OCI. The grades that I got my first semester of law school are pretty much the only grades I got in law school that actually mattered. So I knew that first semester going in, I knew I had to do good, but I had no idea. I could not fathom how important that was.
And what do you do now?
I'm a healthcare associate at Bradley A. Rand Bolt Cummings, which is a Southeast-based law firm. We have 12 offices, pretty much all across the Southeast, and then on an office up in DC. I do healthcare regulatory and transactional work, which how I describe to people who aren't immediately in it because it's so niche. I'm in the business of buying and selling hospitals and other healthcare facilities.
And how big is your firm?
So we have a little over 600 attorneys. I think might be almost up to 700. 12 offices, about 700, a little under 700 attorneys.
Would that classify as big law?
So funny enough, there are capital B big law firms, and there are lowercase b big law firms. I feel like I work at a lowercase b big law firm in the sense that big is related to the size. We have a lot of attorneys, but we don't have international offices and thousands of attorneys like you would if you were at a Cravath or a Paul Weiss, which are these are just names. Like if you aren't in it, it won't make sense. But these are just names. They're massive conglomerate firms that exist in this country. That's not my vibe. That's not my speed. They overwork you and they take every fiber of your being. I prefer to work I work at a mid-size. I work in a mid-size market at a lowercase b big law firm. Is how I describe it.
And so, like, if you could just run through a 9 to 5 for somebody who doesn't understand, like, what associates do, what does I'm not going to say 9 to 5. That's a lie.
That's funny. That's funny.
So what does your Monday look like?
My Monday looks like, depending on the week, I go to the gym in the morning, and that's important. That adds context to the rest of my day. I go to the gym in the morning at about 5:30, 6 o'clock. Spend about 2 hours in there, get ready for work, probably end up at the office somewhere between 8:30 and 9. And this is just my schedule. Some people get in earlier, some people go in later, some people stay later, some people leave early, right? I get in about 8:39, and I have a to-do list. Something I never anticipated needing or having, because I've always been a running list in my head of things to do person. But I have a to-do list. I'm on matters, which are in the transactional world a bit different than cases. I'm on deals that are happening. I am if a client brings a regulatory issue and they need resolved, that's a matter. Just I count matters as individual things I need to do for a client. And inside my practice and inside my practice group, we have institutional clients, which are health systems. So in litigation, you'll have a client and you'll handle a case. But in transactional work, it's really, you'll have a company who wants to do a bunch of things, and you'll help them do all of those things. So I'll have a client and they want to buy a surgery center, want to know if they violated HIPAA, enter a clinical research agreement, a whole bunch of other panoply of things, really. And we will help them through all of their regulatory or transactional issues to get them to the result that they want. So I have a to-do list of all those things. And from the time I walk in, say it'd be 8:39, and to the time I leave, which depending on the day, could be 7:30. Sometimes I get lucky, leave at 6.
Well, that is the traffic in your area when you're trying to drive home.
So specifically, and how I make myself okay with this is I wait until the traffic is done to leave work. So the traffic can be bad. So in Nashville, how I try to couch it, it's somewhere between Atlanta and Birmingham. We're not the bustle and hustle of Atlanta, but we're not the slow of Birmingham. We're somewhere in the middle. And the traffic can get bad because this city was not built for this amount of people. Mm-hmm. So the traffic can get really bad. But I try to leave work after the traffic gets bad. And also I live like 5 to 7 minutes from the office because I don't like to drive. So at best I'm driving a mile and a half. So I don't have to deal with really bad traffic, but there are people who have to hop on the highways, partners and stuff that live out in the suburbs who get caught in really bad traffic and may stay late as well to avoid it.
Yeah, and so the reason I asked that question is because I've heard from other interviewees about like trying to figure out where to live and like how to navigate making those kind of decisions when you're also trying to navigate picking a job. And as somebody who worked in Buckhead, which is Atlanta, but did not live in the city, I could tell you that your schedule, I actually got in at 7 o'clock in the morning and I would leave at 7 o'clock in the evening. But trust me, I took very long lunch breaks. So I get the feeling. And so I have just a couple of short questions before we wrap up. What advice would you give to, you've kind of already answered this, but what advice would you give to a high school student who is a first generation? They might not know that they want to go to college, but they want to try anyway. What advice would you give that student on kind of navigating the next steps into higher education?
In an effort not to repeat what I said before, I think it's really about finding, in addition to finding your thing that you enjoy, find your people. Because it can be an extremely isolating experience and you will feel like you're alone in it. And I promise you, you are not. So find your people. who will help you navigate that process. I'm still friends today with the people I found my freshman year of college. So find your people who are going to help you navigate the very murky waters that is higher education when you don't have experience or assistance otherwise.
And then, is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you would like to share?
I guess never be afraid to charter your own path and journey. Your journey and your time and what you the time and effort and commitment you commit to yourself will pay dividends regardless. Always be committed to learning and developing yourself. If you're a first gen like me, your time the time you spent learning simply to get to the level that other people who have that experience are already at, that they come in on, that's not wasted time at all. That's not time lost. That's a commitment and an investment in yourself. I think that's it. Always be able to pivot, always be able to grow and be willing and open to opportunities that will come your way, because they will come your way. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, my last question. Earlier in the conversation, you said that you did not peak in high school.
Yeah.
What are some things that you're looking forward to in the future?
Honestly, making a partner, I guess, one day would be really great. And just continuing to have experiences that I never dreamt I'd have. Going places that I never dreamt I'd go. Doing things that I never dreamt I'd do. Buying things that I never anticipated being able to buy. Increasing my wealth and status in the legal field, personally, chartering paths for people and helping people come along this journey with me that similarly also never felt that they'd be there. Mentoring the next classes of young Black attorneys is something that really, really gives me hope. 2% of Black women are attorneys. And I want that number to grow. 2% of attorneys are Black women. I mixed that up. But I want that number to grow, and I will do everything in my power to get it to grow and make sure that people who come after me have opportunities that I had to create for myself. I those opportunities because it can feel extremely hard and isolating and difficult when you don't have somebody who looks like you in those spaces. And my headshot has braids in it. I'm wearing 2 gold necklaces because I keep my long nails, because I want people who look like me to be able to know that they can exist and thrive in spaces that they don't think they can. So helping that next class of attorneys and future classes of attorneys come up and learn that they can do this, it's definitely something I'm looking forward to as an attorney now.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Adriante. I really appreciate it. And I know that the next generations will also appreciate it.
Fingers crossed.